Guys, welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be doing these highlighted parts of the syllabus, that is to understand overpopulation and underpopulation, as well as the causes and consequences of these two. So there are three terms that you need to know in this chapter. First one is overpopulation. So what is overpopulation? Overpopulation is when it's when the number of people in an area or country increases so much, or there's an increasing level of the numbers of people, that there is pressure on the resources available. There's a pressure on the resources available, and so because of the pressure in resources, there's going to be a decrease in the standards of living. For example, if there's around 1,500 people in a place that only has water for 500 people, then the living standards of 1,000 who cannot afford the water or do not have access to the water decrease. So that's what overpopulation is. Now let's talk about optimum population. So optimum population is the highest average living standards, right? So again, if there's an area with 1,500 people and it has exactly around 1,501 or 1,503 amount of resources, then it's perfect, because that is the population size which can fully utilize the natural resources available, and in turn it gives maximum capita output, that is the maximum profit, like in terms of money. So we also have underpopulation. So this is when the population is too small to utilize its resources. So for example, a place with around 500 people, but there's just around, like 2,000 resources or something. I'll put it in an easier way. So there's 500 students in a country, right? And there's about 3,000 schools. So the schools that are not being used are just going to be, they're going to have to be shut down. They're going to have to be demolished or used for something else. So it's a waste of resources. So that's what underpopulation is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a graph just to give you guys a better understanding of this. It's quite an easy topic, but I just think that a graph would be easier to help the understanding. So let us say that this is total population, and this is GDP per head. And here is where underpopulation is, and this is overpopulation, and this is optimum population. So what we can understand from this graph is that if the total population is underpopulated, the GDP per head is too low. If it is overpopulated, the GDP per head is also the same. It's basically too low. However, at optimum population, you can see that the GDP per head is very high, and this is actually perfect. This is what we're looking for. Now let's talk about the causes as well as the consequences of overpopulation and underpopulation. So I'm going to be listing some general factors that would lead to overpopulation and underpopulation, and in your papers you might be asked to apply this understanding to a situation. So you should be well versed with these factors. So the first cause of overpopulation is high birth rates. Now you're going to have to know the causes of high birth rates as well, because you need to be able to expand your answer, not just, give a single statement or a phrase. So here's what causes high birth rates. And I actually explained most of this in part 1 of population dynamics, but I'm just still going to be giving a brief introduction again. So here is what causes high birth rates. First of all is the lack of female education. So when women are not aware of birth control, they really don't know that they have a choice to have or not have a baby, so most of them just go ahead and have a baby. So the more educated the female population of a country is, the less their population size. Now, sometimes even if you are educated, you won't have access to it. So poverty or the lack of access to contraceptives. Now, some families, such as those who work in farms, subsistence farming, or commercial farming, they will usually have large families so that the children can work in the farms. So, in these places, children are seen as an economical asset. Next, we have high infant mortality, that is, when an infant dies before reaching their first birthday. And then we also have cultural reasons. So, in some places, women really don't have a choice on reproductions. If their culture expects that they have a lot of children, then they will just have a lot of children without really having much say in it. So that is actually the fertility side of overpopulation. Now, there's also high death rates, right? So what I mean by this is it might be a little confusing because you might think that, okay, so if there's high birth rates as well as high death rates, wouldn't the population even out or something like that? But it's actually not like that. So I talked about infant mortality, right? So what families usually do to compensate for the loss of children is have more children. So again, how do these children die? So there's going to be disease, famine. So what happens is when children die because of these reasons, this this increases. So when death rates increase, birth rates would also increase. However, this is sort of how do I say it? It's a tricky concept, slightly tricky if you don't use it accurately. So if you're asked the causes of overpopulation, I think the safe way is to just talk about high birth rates. Another thing that causes, sorry, give me a second. Another thing that causes overpopulation is migration. So when there's a lot of migration to a country, international migration that is, or just, any sort of migration, the population increases, not only counting the people who are native to that country, people who are, from other countries. So because of that, population increases. So let's talk about the consequences. So overall, if I'm just to summarize it, the leading cause of overpopulation is high birth rates and falling death rates. leading to a natural increase. So now let's talk about the impacts or the consequences of overpopulation. So firstly, there's going to be heavy traffic congestion. So a lot of people will go to work, a lot of people will use public transport. Transport links are going to be densely populated, so traffic is a problem, and this is actually part of the broader topic of environment. So because there's a lot of traffic congestion, there's going to be an increase in emissions of greenhouse gases. So in the end, it increases the climate change. Next, we have services, and this is the factor that actually comes up a lot in the marketing teams. So if asked the impacts of overpopulation in an MEDC or an LEDC, you can talk about services. So you can say that there's pressure on education, healthcare, social services. And obviously, you can just say schools for this, you can say hospitals, and then you can just say, anything that fits these categories, and you will be able to get, if it's a 5-mark question, 3 or 4 marks. And 3, the demand for food and water will increase. And this is one of the most significant consequences, because what overpopulation does is it puts a demand on agricultural production, which consumes more water than any other sector. So a lot of people would not have access to safe drinking water. Now, because there is a lot of people, there's going to be competition for land. And because there's competition for land, housing prices are going to increase. So it's going to be expensive to live in that country, which is also the reason why a lot of MEDCs, they have, they're not overpopulated or anything like that, because the families over there tend to have lesser children because they want to avoid the cost of raising a child. Now let's talk about the causes of underpopulation. So underpopulation, there's going to be low birth rate, high death rate. So there's going to be a natural decrease. What causes low birth rate is the education of women. As I said earlier, the more educated a woman is, the less likely she is to have a lot of children. Again, it's all her choice. Access to contraception. The cost of raising a child. And as I said earlier, actually, we already talked about what causes high death rates. So you need to know this as well. So consequences of underpopulation. I'm gonna have to get a new page for this. Give me a second. So Here are the impacts of underpopulation. First of all, there's going to be a shortage of workers or a shortage of labor supply. Lesser profit for the government because there's fewer people to pay taxes. And there's going to be wasted resources, such as a lot of food and water goes wasted, and for the closure of services. So, for example, there's a lot of schools and hospitals that are quite literally abandoned because no one uses them because there's not enough people to use them. So that's basically it for this part of your syllabus. That is, now you are able to show an understanding of overpopulation and underpopulation, as well as the causes and the causes and the consequences of these two. I'm so sorry, I literally cannot speak. So you can take a screenshot or whatever.